All right. Good morning, everyone. First session of the Battery Week. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. I'm going to hand over to Lucas, who can kick us off.
Hi, everybody. Also from my side, great to see so many participants already to kick off the Battery Week. Let me quickly introduce who's here with you today. So my name is Lucas. I'm one of the co-founders of Sphere, and Luca, the other co-founder, sits next to me. We're super excited to talk about the Battery Week. And let me give you a quick introduction to today's agenda. So for those of you who don't know us yet, we'll talk 2-3 words about who Sphere is. Then we talk about the actual bottleneck that we see in the battery validation, battery development. Then we will switch over to our tech stack, and Luca will talk in detail about which technologies are we using to solve this puzzle. Then we'll talk about the value that's in for you. I mean, that's probably the most important bit. And then we'll give a quick outline of the Battery Week and the other sessions that you can expect during this week. At the end, obviously, we'll have time for Q&A. You can post, as I understood, the questions already in the chat, and then we'll take them either on the fly or at the end. But for sure, we'll make some time at the end for Q&A. For those of you who want to share this session with any coworkers or colleagues, we'll record it and then afterwards give you access to the recordings. All right, who's Sphere Energy? So we are founded in 2022. Currently, we have locations in Augsburg, Germany, where we have our large battery technology center. We have our data science and AI lab in Munich and in Zurich, where we're sitting here today. And then we have our engineering hub in Paris, where our third co-founder, Daniel, is sitting. Briefly about the topics that we work with in Sphere. So we distributed or we dissected our offerings in 3 main pillars. The first one, often the most unsexy, but the most important, is the data management. So we're working with the complex problems of our clients, which often require that we go very deep and work with the data that they have, which is often a lot of historical data, very distributed data, and obviously often inhomogeneous or low quality data. And that's probably the first offering that we set out to solve, is really how can we set up a proper data pipeline to then leverage AI and use these new tools to amplify your workflows. And obviously, a big part of this is how do we generate data, right? And this is why we have our battery technology center in Augsburg. We will hear more about that tomorrow, where we set out to really generate high quality data from the start on and work with a lot of different test methods to generate really high quality battery data that we can leverage then in our data pipelines and use artificial intelligence to optimize the workflows within the engineering space. So what is now the problem in the battery space? We work with a large set of clients, from stationary storage providers, power toolers, automotive OEMs, small mobility providers, and they all face a similar problem. And I'm wondering if you have the same, right? Is you often get your battery cells from Asia, mainly China, and then you need to somehow fit them into a product for the European or for the US or for the Western markets. And there, the topic of the validation of a battery cell is obviously tremendously important, because in the end, the battery cell determines the performance and the overall safety of your whatever product it is. So you need to make sure that what you set out in your requirements is met by the battery producers, and therefore it's often mandatory to run very large testing campaigns, right? Where you then set out to test the battery cells in some sort of standard format to make it comparable, but also in a very specified way to understand how these battery cells age and perform within your product. And this is very important because obviously, as you all know, the battery cell behaves differently beginning of life than it behaves end of life. It swells, it has different performance metrics. And if you set out to engineer a product, you need to obviously make sure that it works not only beginning of life, but throughout its entire lifetime. And especially if you have applications where we're talking about 8, 10, 15 years of lifetime, it's very challenging to get these testing results within due time, since we all know engineering cycles are always very tight, but have suffered under the long development cycles that you need based on a battery, right? We've seen that in the car industry, for example, where we have between 36 to 54 months to produce a new vehicle or to engineer a new vehicle based on batteries. And obviously, the Asian players have a tremendous advantage here because they have a very vertical supply chain. So they often, if you look at BYD, for example, they have the expertise in the cell and can then mimic this understanding directly into the car. We in Europe and US often don't have that. So we need to find a way to understand the life and the performance of a battery through its lifetime in a faster way to be able to keep up with these China speed engineering cycles that which are the new pace right now. And this is the key motivation for us to say, okay, how can we understand the performance of a battery cell over its lifetime in a much shorter time span and not use often millions of dollars to run physical testing campaigns, but rather we're inspired by the crash test of cars, for example, where in the beginning a lot of cars were crashed physically because people said this is the most important thing to be accurate here, and we need to run physical crashes to understand the crash behavior of a car. And when we look at now at the times in the engineering world, there's probably only a very small fraction of cars before release being physically crashed, and the rest is run via simulations, and we want to bring the same into the battery world. So really, the V model is the holy grail of the engineering world, right? Where we go from requirements to design, to prototype, to testing, and to validation. And we think the V model is important, but we need to work on that, right? We need to rethink how we, especially in a world driven by batteries, how we can have requirements and build a physical prototype and don't have a testing campaign that takes 24 months in between, because this is simply not feasible. We need to find a way to, at the very beginning, in the first couple of months, understand the aging behavior of a cell and its performance over lifetime to be able to keep this V model alive and to take engineering decisions already in the first couple of weeks, couple of months in the requirement process. And there, the simulation topic of within the battery validation comes into play, right? We thought about this from an engineering life cycle, where in the beginning we benchmark different cells, then we look at the which cell is the right one for us to use in this specific product. And then we set out and we have a huge design of experiment matrix with all different currents, drive or load profiles over different temperatures, and that we then systematically run with physical tests. And this is exactly where we hooked in and said, okay, we need to reduce this number of physical tests. And we built basically an AI that is trained on, I think right now, around 5,000 physical tests. And if I'm not mistaken, over 8.5 million virtual tests that have been performed, virtual battery cells, to understand the combination or the correlation between the physical chemical model of a cell and its aging performance, which has been tested over lifetime. And with this, we set out to, in a very pessimistic scenario in the beginning, to reduce around 30%. So every third test within your extensive design of experiment matrix, we are very comfortable to simulate. And this obviously reduces not only time, but also the cost and efforts that are related to the physical testing campaigns.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction, Lucas. I mean, let's maybe spend a couple of minutes on talking about the status quo. And we all know this status quo, but I think it's important that we remind ourselves, okay, how are we currently validating a new battery technology in the context of an OEM, but also in the context of all kinds of battery power products, to be honest. We start with an extensive physical test matrix, so a large design of experiment matrix spanning across multiple current rates, multiple temperatures as well, and if you're lucky, multiple pressure stacking pressures as well, depending on the technology. Often in the lab, those design of experiment matrices are based on static charge and discharge rates. So often even the emission profiles or driver profiles are not fully looked at, which is already one of the key differentiators of such a data-driven approach. But we start with an extensive DOE that's then shared with different test institutes. Obviously, those OEMs and most of our customers have already capacity internally to test those battery cells. But nevertheless, to be able to test these long matrices, design of experiment matrices, a lot of test institutes are involved. And depending on the application, we talk about 6 to 12 months of physical tests involved, double-digit millions required to test those different conditions of a battery cell, leading then to a bunch of data, right? Often data that is limited quality, often data that sits somewhere in Excel, somewhere in folders of our engineers, of your engineers, without the ability to synthesize the right insights out of this. And then this data mess is shared across teams, right? From the pre-development team to the series development team, to the simulation teams, to the module and pack integration teams. So a lot of different teams within this V-shaped development cycle are dependent on this cell performance data and cell aging data. And often we see with our customers that issues with this quality of data, but sometimes it's also quality of the cell, gets recognized only 2-3 months after the actual test was performed, right? Because again, the data needs to be shared, the data needs to be looked at, and this creates a big feedback loop, a very long feedback loop that often even extensifies these validation cycles. So summary of these current status quo of validating battery cells, it takes a heck of time, right, to validate a new battery cell technology. We have a data mess, right? All these different tests lead to low quality, limited quality data, and eventually also a workflow mess, right? Because this data is shared across various teams and various processes within the development cycle. And I'm looking forward to your comments and questions if you actually agree with this description of the status quo. Now, how do we approach this? And I see that, Lisa, you're saying something. Sorry if I missed this. No. Okay. Yes. So what's our approach, right? How do we want to change this status quo? And let me take a step back here. So when we see or when we look at the innovations that happened around AI 2-3 years ago, mainly the architectural innovations with these transformer-based architectures, we recognize the opportunity of this approach, of this architectural approach to managing and interacting and draw insights from data for the battery field. So what we did is we rebuilt a similar transformer-based GPT, a generative pre-trained transformer, not based on language, such as the big large language models. We all know ChatGPT from OpenAI, Claude from Anthropic is also very, very widely used in the last weeks, months. And we built this GPT based on battery data. So based on time series data. So where we have on the x-axis, we have time, right? In a battery test, we have the different timestamps of a test. And on the y-axis, we have the different features of a battery test. We have voltage, current, we have temperature. And we use this data to build and pre-train such a transformer model for the battery field. Now, what is the advantage of such an AI-powered or data-driven approach to battery simulation? Well, it is fairly generalizable, right? So it works not just for one specific system, but it works across different systems, across different chemistries, across different applications, if trained and fine-tuned on the right data. And this was our starting point, right? We built this now, I think, 3 years ago. We launched the first version of our transformer-based simulation model. And since then, we really developed it together with our clients and the ecosystem we're working in. And we believe this gives another approach to simulation, another angle to simulation, to really address the status quo and improve the status quo of battery validation that we just introduced. Now, how does our approach work? And maybe just before I go there, put this on a map, right? I think everyone is putting AI on their company profile just to make it a bit more interesting for investors and customers. But when we talk about AI, we really mean generative AI, so GPT, generative pre-trained transformers. And we put this on a map here, how we differentiate ourselves to simple machine learning algorithms. We really built this Sphere Apex transformer model, similar to how OpenAI built GPT-4, or by now, I think, GPT-5. We work closely together with NVIDIA, and we won the Inception program 2 years ago with our approach, with our architecture. And obviously, compute is very important when we talk about the pre-training of these models. Now, how does it work, right? Again, to take the analogy of a large language model, it's very similar. We don't prompt our model with text, with an image. We prompt our model with initial test cycles. So we give 50, 100, 150 cycles of initial test results to our model as a prompt, together with some metadata around it. And we're going to talk a bit more about that later, and definitely in more details in the later sessions this week. And we can then tell the model, okay, now please simulate the end of life scenarios of this specific system based on these initial cycles for different operational conditions, different C rates, different mission profiles, different temperatures, different depth of discharge, different SOC windows. And as an output, we really get synthetic data. So we get time series data as an output, and it feels like if you would have tested this cell in-house. So you get all the different aging curves, obviously, you get all the different current profiles and voltage profiles out of our model as an output. So it's really a different way of simulating, right? You don't get any equations out, you get really data out of our models as if you would have tested it. Yeah, how does it work? In a bit more details. I don't want to get too technical. We have proper deep dives, I think, on Wednesday and Thursday this week, where the team will give you a demo of how the tool works, where the team will give you more details, how we actually built the architecture, how it works, how we parameterize our models. I just want to give you a high-level summary to differentiate between 3 different phases of model of our simulation strategy. We have the pre-training phase, we have the fine-tuning phase, and then we have the inference phase. The pre-training phase is what we've done over the last 3 years. Lucas mentioned it. We used over 5,000 physical tests, almost 10 million synthetic data points to pre-train our transformer model for the battery validation use case. We have used time series data, so really cycling data with different C rates, different temperatures, as well as metadata. So data that describes the system, that describes the battery cell. This is often simple metadata, but involves also physical parameters. So parameters for an ECM model or a P2D model are metadata that we give to the model to teach the model the physical limitations and physical parameters of a system, more than just the time series data. That's a pre-training that happens within our infrastructure, which is very compute heavy, hence the partnership with NVIDIA. What we then do is the fine-tuning, and we do the fine-tuning with and for our clients, because we realize obviously that even though when we spend years and millions on testing, we can never have the same valuable and relevant data of a battery than our clients. So we take our pre-trained model and fine-tune it for a specific client use case. And therefore, we use the historic test data that has been generated over the past years with our clients, and we fine-tune our model for the specific client use case. Obviously, those fine-tuned models are completely IP of our customers, so no model weights are shared across projects. This is then really your specific intelligence that we build in the fine-tuning phase. And then the third phase that I mentioned, which is not here on the slide, is then obviously the inference, so the simulation. The simulations, the scenarios, the prediction scenarios we run with this model. So again, pre-training happens on our side with our data, fine-tuning happens within the infrastructure of our clients with the data that our clients have collected, and the inference then can be run with limited compute within the infrastructure of our clients. Great, I mentioned it before already that the physical parameters are already given as metadata points to our model in the pre-training phase. But obviously, we also use those physical parameters to explain the results of our AI models, right? And we have a separate session on that on Friday, actually, the trust about AI and how we can trust these simulation outputs of our models. And the big factor there is explainability, right? If we get a simulation, aging simulation of our AI model, the engineers need to be able to trust the simulation and also need to be able to work with these outputs. And therefore, with our outputs, the engineers always get a fully parameterized P2D model and ECM model to understand what was the physical and electrochemical behavior of my cell, of my battery, that would lead to such an aging and such a performance of my battery cell. So explainability, very important for our approach. And why are we doing this, Lucas?
Yeah, I think in the end, doing AI for the sake of it is not the goal, right? We need to have a clear business case at hand, and I think reducing the testing efforts in a pessimistic or in a conservative scenario by 30% and speeding up the time of development is a massive business case, and that's actually the two drivers that we're working on. So really reducing the cost of the physical testing campaigns that you guys are doing, and obviously deliver valuable information that you can take decisions already early in the requirement phase, because your understanding of how these cells behave over lifetime is just much greater. And I think what we at Sphere do different than others is we're not only working on a use case. We have the use cases because they're important to deliver the value and the ROI on the investments, but we work in the realm of an AI operating system, because we believe AI has to scale within enterprises, and use cases are nice verticals to solve specific solutions. But we set out to really bring an AI operating system into the engineering ecosystem, where we have basically three defined pillars. We work, as I mentioned in the very beginning, on a unified data layer. So to ingest all your data to make sure they're high quality and they're harmonized and they're AI readable. So the whole vectorization game is in there. Then we have the model orchestration layer, where we say it's very important that you can use all the different models that are becoming more and more commodity and that are available, often open source, right? There is every week we're talking to our tech team, there's a new model coming out with a new skill, and you have to be able to run them all in an orchestrated layer, right? You cannot be locked in by one vendor that only has one model. You need to be able to access the variety of models that are out there. And then obviously it's very important how you distribute and use compute. We are experts in that. We understand exactly for which task, which type of compute is important. Do you need very expensive GPU, high performance compute, or is it okay to run that on a normal CPU virtual machine? This whole orchestration is our second layer where a lot of our intelligence lies in, to do this securely and safely as well. And then only the third layer is really what your teams are interfering with, which we call the application or the intelligence layer. Then is where we manage different workflows, where we have the use cases implement within your tool chain. This is really then the sexy UI part that your workers will see. But there is a lot of more complexity behind it that we set out to solve with our AI operating system.
And maybe a couple of words there regarding our opinion and belief, right? We have now built this transformer model for the battery validation use case because we have the data and we have the clear need at hand. But we're well aware that probably in 1 or 2 years, others can do that as well, or even better than us, right? We are not a hyperscaler who has access to a lot of compute. But we believe that the true value of our approach is, as Lucas mentioned, getting your data ready to interact with these models. And hence the title, right, that those AI models will become a commodity. Also, domain-specific models will probably become a commodity, but what won't become a commodity is your data, right? And we need to start working, and you need to start leveraging your historic battery test data in the right way to be then able to get the value out of these models.
And there will be a very interesting session on this topic tomorrow. Exactly. This is the perfect segue to what you can expect from the rest of the week. So as I mentioned, tomorrow is really all about battery data, how to manage it, how to make sure it has the right quality, how to distribute it within your teams, how to analyze and visualize the important KPIs. On Wednesday, the team will then talk about physics models and the parameterization of ECM and P2D models. This is a very crucial step within the engineering to then set out to engineer all kinds of electrical performances, but also thermal performances of the product of the vehicle. On Thursday, we will talk then about what Luca briefly mentioned about the prediction of nonlinear aging of batteries with AI, the data-driven approach that we have built. And on Friday, we will talk about how and why we can trust AI in the whole engineering process, and talk about what are key principles. Luca mentioned already explainability, transparency, and they're obviously having a partner like DEKRA on board helps a lot to not only work on the right technology, but also we're working very tightly with regulatories and the policymakers to make sure that AI has a trusted place within the development cycle.
And that's exactly the reason why we set up this battery week, right? Solving the battery validation use case or changing it and approaching this use case takes 4 dimensions, right? One of which is AI, but it takes way more than AI, right? It takes those 4 dimensions, right? Data, physics, models, classical simulation, AI, and also the trust behind it. And we're looking forward to these conversations. It would be great if you tune in for the other days as well. And I think now we have a Q&A.
Yeah, open for the questions. Yeah, so maybe let's take on the question of, let me just check, this is Valentin. I mean, obviously this is the question we always get, right? It's trained on historic data. What about if we have new cell chemistries? And that's where our approach of linking the physical-chemical models to our data-driven approach is really key. Right, our model has learned with the 5,000 physical tests that we have put in, and with over the 8 million different combinations of synthetic data, it has learned to understand the correlation between a physical test result, so the cycling result, the behavior over cycling, and the physical-chemical baseline to it. And this is what we leverage then also for new cells. So the model has its core intelligence already trained. And then when you have a new cell, we do initial tests of around 3 to 4 weeks. We run physical tests, and we give this, as Luca pointed out, to the model as a prompt. Plus, obviously, the auto-parameterized, you will learn more on that on Wednesday, I think, the auto-parameterized P2D and ECM model. So the AI model then automatically can understand your physics, your chemistry, and the cycling behavior, and based on that, do already quite significantly good predictions on aging performance. Obviously, the crazier you get based on your database, the more the error becomes. But you will see on the session on Thursday how surprisingly good these models understand behavior. And also, as Luca said, we are always giving you as an output not only an aging curve, but the understanding of the aging curve. So the different phenomena that contributed. So that helps you as a technician, as an engineer, already to understand the aging behavior that the model is predicting.
And to make this maybe a bit more tangible, right? So we are working with several cell manufacturers already. And there the use case is similar to what you just described, Valentin, right? Where we have A sample, B sample, C sample, and in every sample stage we have different stages. So A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, and they're often not sequential. And we have integrated our models within this validation process, right? So that the model learns with your sample validation process. So from A1 to A2, probably you have still to do a couple of physical tests, but then from B2 to B3, the model understands already your system very well and is able to validate this sample stage much faster with limited physical tests.
Yeah, and Nessa just asked which test we should perform. And we have a standard procedure there of tests that we need to perform to then automatically parameterize the P2D and ECM model. You will learn more on these tests also on Wednesday. And then it's for the AI model, it's simple aging, right? So we have different standard conditions. You cycle age the cells under different C rates, under different temperatures. And then we always start with reducing the number of tests you need to validate a cell. So we always reduce, for example, if you test 6 different temperatures or 6 different C rates, we say leave 2 of them out and we simulate them. And then you can basically correlate the physical test to the simulation. And that gives you already a pretty good understanding of the accuracy of our tests, of our simulations.
I think there's also some questions in the Q&A tab. How can engineers trust the AI result? Great question. We don't see where it's coming from, but we have a separate session just about this topic, right? Which is on Friday. How can we trust the simulation results of our AI or of AI in general, which is can be a philosophical question, but we approach this, and I mentioned it before, with physical explainable results. So that's the explainability of our output. That's definitely one dimension. There are others. And yeah, you should definitely tune in on Friday where we talk 45 minutes just about this topic.
And then we have Al-Nali, who's asking the question of the models are pre-trained on real battery cells and a lot of synthetic cells. So is there not a vicious cycle of synthetic data then creating a distributional bias and blind spots on the training data? So this is only our pre-trained model, right? As we pointed out, we can never have as much data as a large OEM or as you as a specific power tooler that understands your cell technology better than we do. We come with that pre-trained model, and then we build an instance at our client side where we put in all the historical data of our client as well. That helps already mitigate this bias by a lot. And then we have a clear stepwise approach. We will never set out and say, we have only trained this model on, let's say, sodium ion cells, and now we're simulating liquid or solid lithium metal solid state cells. That wouldn't make sense. So we always have a staggered approach to say we always need to give the model some kind of physical context of the new cells, and then we have a clear approach how we integrate these new cells into the model. We always run, and that's a trust question as well, we always run also t-SNE analysis to understand how off is the data set towards the trained and fine-tuned data set. And this is how we mitigate these bias problems and have a very effective way to bring in new ground truth and to teach the model basically the new physical-chemical behavior of this new cell.
Thanks. And then there is a more pragmatic question, but I think a relevant one, which we haven't covered. Is our model available for public or demo? We can definitely set up a demo. So please reach out to either Lucas, myself, or the team.
Lisa, maybe you can post the email address in the chat.
And we are more than happy to give you a demo how the model actually works.
Then we have a question from Surai. Can you please expand more on the DOE approach? Do you also work on design of battery materials, components? So we're focusing not so much on the components and material side. We're more on the validation side, which obviously intrinsically also has the material design in it. But so far we have really focused, and I hope you understand, the battery manufacturing market is not as large in Europe. So that's why we more focus on the validation side of things, where you then can draw back conclusions, obviously, on the materials as well. But we haven't really focused on the materials components development as such.
Now, looking at the time, I would say let's do a couple more, maybe two more. So there is another one, anonymous question about, if you don't have the data, can you just simulate the behavior of different materials and different cells? I think it goes a bit in the direction of the question that Lucas just answered. It depends a lot on the input data that we gave the model. In theory, that's absolutely possible. So the architecture would allow for these kind of scenarios and works already for the systems that we have in our pre-training. So for the systems that are in our model, part of these 5,000 tests, we can obviously run scenarios and generate synthetic data of how would a specific cell component or cell system behave.
And if you have enough information about these cell components, we can run synthetic data campaigns, actually, where we input these in the ECM or P2D models and then run campaigns basically to generate cycling output in a synthetic manner. That's definitely possible.
Okay. Then there is a longer or a twofold question from Christoph. What do we mean with Chinese speed? Lucas, you want to take this one?
I mean, China speed is really the latest teaser or tag word within the automotive industry, right? The Chinese managed to develop a new car within 18 months. And this is really unseen, unprecedented. And this is where obviously the European and the US market is lagging behind. And the managers are using this to reshape their strategies, to reshape their development cycles, to get closer to these 12 to 18 months to build a car in China.
And the second part of the question is whether or not these models can be applied in the earlier stages of cell development. Absolutely. That's maybe the example I mentioned before, where we work together with the multiple cell manufacturers to exactly accelerate these initial stages of development. So where the cathode material, or let's say the electrolyte composition, changes between sample stages. And our model accelerates the validation of these design changes drastically.
And then maybe as a last question, I think that's an important one, how can you protect proprietary client data during the model tuning phase? So we have our pre-trained model that we constantly further develop, that is always also pushed to our clients. And then we set up a separate branch, a separate instance at our client side, so that our client data are not leaving their premises. They're really within their premises. There's also no feedback loop to our base model. It's only going forward. So it's only pushing our model to the client, but no feedback loop to always also comply to the all these TSAX regulations, data security, and have no data leaking back to our models or then to others. That's really, really important. And I mean, we handle very sensitive client data within our test centers since several years, and I think we know how to handle data securely and safely. And this is also how we do it within our AI use cases or AI projects.
On the minute. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining, and looking forward to the other sessions throughout the week. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.